The rain hit hard on the metal roofs of the junkyard. It was cold, dark, and the ground was soaked in mud and broken wires. Jace moved slowly through the piles of scrap, holding a flickering light in his hand. He was used to this place. Used to silence, used to being alone. But tonight, something was different. A strange sound came from the far corner of the yard. Not metal, not wind, something soft, something alive. Jace stopped and listened. It was a whimper, a cry, almost like a small animal in pain. But it didn't sound like any animal he knew. He stepped over a crushed satellite dish and broken panels. The cry came again, closer now. He moved faster, heart beating louder than the rain, and then he saw her, a small figure, hiding under the remains of an old escape pod. She was shivering, her skin pale and glowing slightly in the rain. Her eyes were wide, glowing blue, full of fear. She had no shoes, no bag, nothing, just a thin piece of cloth around her shoulders. She looked more like a ghost than a living being. Jace knelt slowly, showing her his hands. "It's okay," he said softly. "I won't hurt you." She didn't speak, didn't move, but her eyes followed him. He placed a dry cloth on the ground and backed away. She looked at it, then at him, then slowly crawled forward and took it. Jace waited. She wrapped herself in the cloth, still shaking, still silent. He could see scratches on her arms, like she had crawled through sharp metal. She looked young, maybe a teenager, but clearly not human. Jace reached into his bag and pulled out a protein bar. He opened it and placed it on the ground. Again, she hesitated. But hunger won. She took it, smelled it, then ate in small bites, like she hadn't eaten in days. "What's your name?" Jace asked, no answer. "Where are you from?" He tried again. She looked down, then away. Rain ran down her face like tears. Jace knew he couldn't leave her here. This place wasn't safe, not for anyone. Old bots still roamed. Thieves sometimes sneaked in, and something about this girl felt important. He stood and held out his hand. "Come with me," he said. She stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. Her hand was cold, but her grip was strong. Jace led her through the junk, back to his small shack. It wasn't much, just a metal box with heat panels and a bed. But it was dry, and it was safe. He let her sit by the heater, gave her a dry blanket. She sat curled up in a corner, still watching him, still not speaking. He brought her a warm drink. She took it with both hands, eyes never leaving his face. He noticed something strange when she touched the cup. It glowed faintly, like her skin had some kind of energy inside. But he said nothing. "I'll call you." He paused, thinking. "Neva," he said, "is that okay?" She looked at him, blinked slowly, then gave a small nod. It was the first time she showed trust. A single nod, but it meant everything. That night, Jace couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the rain. He kept hearing things, metal creaking, whispers of wind, but maybe it was just in his head. Maybe he was just scared of what he didn't understand. Neva slept lightly, like someone ready to run. She didn't snore, didn't dream out loud. She just curled up under the blanket. And every now and then, her body would glow, a soft pulse, like a heartbeat of light. Jace looked at her and sighed. "Who are you really?" He whispered, but she didn't answer. Only the rain replied, and far off, hidden in the junk, something else was listening too. Asterisk. The junkyard was quiet in the early morning, with mist rising from the metal piles like smoke from sleeping beasts. Jace stepped outside his shack, rubbing his tired eyes. The air cold enough to sting his skin. Beside the shack, the alien girl was sitting silently on a broken crate, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes fixed on the rising sun. He watched her for a moment without speaking. There was something peaceful about her in that moment, something strange too. Her skin shimmered slightly under the sunlight, as if tiny particles were alive beneath the surface. He walked toward her, slowly, not wanting to startle her. She didn't look at him. But she didn't move away, either. He placed a metal mug of hot water beside her foot, and she reached down without a word and picked it up. The warmth made her fingers relax just a little. They hadn't spoken much in the last day, mostly because she said almost nothing, but he'd started to understand her silence. Jace pointed to the half-built shelter nearby, made from scrap doors, engine covers, and old solar panels. "I'm building that for you," he said gently. Still, no words from her, but her eyes followed his finger and stayed on the structure. Longer than usual, he smiled a little, not expecting thanks, just glad she was listening. The junkyard stretched for miles in every direction, metal hills and rusted machines piled high like forgotten monuments. No one came here often, which was exactly why Jace had chosen it. It was the only place he could call his own, away from cities, noise, and rules. But now, he wasn't alone anymore. As the day passed, Jace returned to work, lifting parts, fitting panels, and sealing gaps with old foam gel. The structure took shape slowly. A curved roof, a hidden door, insulation built from broken heat tubes and layered scrap. He worked with quiet focus, and the girl Neva watched him from her spot, never interfering. At one point, she stood and walked over, her bare feet barely making a sound on the gravel. She picked up a small piece of metal and held it toward him. Jace took it with a nod and added it to the wall. That was the beginning of something. She didn't speak, but that small action told him she understood, and maybe even wanted to help. Over the next hour, she handed him more pieces, always carefully chosen. It was strange somehow. She seemed to know which parts would fit best, and when she touched a power coil, the dead battery inside sparked faintly for a second. Jace noticed, but said nothing. When the sun dropped low and shadows returned, they sat under the half-finished roof, a fire flickering in a steel drum nearby. He handed her a piece of bread, which she broke in half and offered some back to him. This time he smiled wider, and she almost smiled too. The fire danced in her eyes, and Jace saw something there, something ancient, something sad. She wasn't just lost, she was running from something. That night, as Jace lay in his bed, he heard soft steps moving near the shack. He stayed still, breathing slow, listening. It wasn't Neva. Her footsteps were lighter. These were heavier, purposeful, moving around the outside. Then stopping, Jace sat up, grabbed the metal rod he kept beside the bed, and stepped outside. No one was there, only the shadows between scrap towers. But when he looked down, he saw fresh tracks in the mud boot prints, human, large. He turned slowly and saw Neva watching him from the doorway, her eyes glowing softly. She didn't say a word, but he could tell she felt it too. They weren't alone anymore. The next morning, Jace didn't say much, but he worked faster building walls higher, making the door thicker. Neva followed him silently, her movements more focused than before. When she brushed her hand against the solar panel, it turned slightly toward the sun, without any wiring. Jace stared at her, but she avoided his eyes. Something about her was waking up, something more than just fear or memory. As the sky turned orange again, Jace stood back and looked at the structure. It wasn't perfect, but it was strong, hidden, and warm inside. He glanced at Neva, who was standing under the roof, touching one of the beams gently. She looked at him, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak, but nothing came out. Instead, she pressed her palm to the wall, and for a moment, the metal glowed where she touched it. Jace didn't understand what she was, or why she had come to this place, but he knew one thing for sure. He had brought her in from the cold, and now, she was starting to make this place feel like more than just a pile of junk. It was starting to feel like a home, and far beyond the scrapyard, in the black night sky, something else was watching her glow. The old radio on Jace's work table had been dead for years. Its wires were rusted, its speaker torn, and its power source long gone. He only kept it because it reminded him of the world before he hid in the junkyard. But that morning, as he passed by it holding a toolbox, it suddenly crackled. Just for a second, a sharp static sound filled the air. And then it went silent again. Jace froze, staring at it. His hand hovered over the power switch, though he knew it wasn't plugged in. He looked over his shoulder, and there she was, Neva, standing near the doorway with her hand still raised. From the wall she had just touched, he didn't say anything, neither did she, but they both knew something strange had happened. Later that day, he tested it. He opened the radio, touched wires, checked everything. Still dead, no spark, no hum. But when Neva passed by it again, the machine gave a soft flicker of life. Jace sat back inside. He wasn't imagining it. He didn't ask her about it, not directly, but that night. While they ate their quiet dinner near the fire, he pointed at the radio and said, "It spoke when you came close." Neva looked down, tearing the bread in her hand slowly. "You're connected to things," he added. Still no reply, just the fire crackling and wind pushing through empty metal. The next morning, Jace woke to distant voices. Not inside the radio, faint, broken words in a language he didn't understand. When he stepped outside, Neva was already up, standing near the scrap tower, holding a small shard of glass that pulsed with light. He walked up to her and asked, "What are you trying to do?" She finally spoke, just 2 words, "Not me." Those 2 words changed everything. He stared at her, and she looked back with serious eyes. "The machines speak first," she said softly, and then she turned away, leaving him with more questions than before. Around midday, they heard the engine. A sharp humming in the distance, cutting through the quiet skies. Jace pulled Neva into the shelter and climbed up to the lookout panel. A small black scout craft floated over the far edge of the junkyard, its light scanning the piles. It didn't land, but it stayed for too long, circling slowly before drifting away into the clouds. Jace didn't breathe until it vanished. He turned to Neva and whispered, "Are they looking for you?" She nodded once, then added, "They want the core." "The what?" he asked, but she just looked down at her hands and said, "It's inside me." Jace stepped back, unsure what that meant, but the fear in her voice was real, and that was enough. He grabbed an old blanket and covered the shelter entrance in metal panels, sealing them tighter than before. No more open doors that night. While Neva slept, Jace opened his journal. He sketched a drawing of the ship they saw, labeled, "It's Scout Number 1. Then on the next page, he drew her eyes, glowing like quiet stars. He didn't know what the core was, but he was starting to believe she wasn't just an escapee. She might be something much more powerful or dangerous. The next day brought unexpected guests. 3 strangers in dusty gear arrived on foot, pretending to be scavengers. They knocked on Jace's shack and smiled too wide, their hands too close to their belts. "We're looking for some tech." The leader said, "Maybe old transmitters." Jace lied calmly, "Nothing like that here." They pushed past him and started looking anyway. Neva stayed hidden under the shelter floor, her breath slow and silent. Jace stalled them with fake stories, broken wires, and broken smiles. But one of them noticed the repaired solar panel glowing perfectly. He squinted, then said, "This looks new." Jace's heart thumped, but he just shrugged. "I got lucky," before they left. The tallest one dropped the metal chip behind the workbench. Jace didn't see it then, but Neva did. After they were gone, she crawled out, holding the chip between her fingers like it was poison. "They'll come back," she said, her voice flat. "And this time, they won't be smiling." That night, Jace found himself staring at the stars above the junkyard. He felt like he had pulled something bright out of the dark, and now the dark wanted it back. Neva sat beside him, her head resting on her knees. "Why me?" he asked her quietly. She didn't answer, but her hand touched his lightly, and the ground beneath them hummed for a moment, like it too had heard his question. The first time she spoke a full sentence. It wasn't to answer a question. It wasn't during a quiet meal or a peaceful moment. It was in the middle of the night when Jace woke to the sound of her screaming. He rushed out of bed, heart pounding, grabbing a wrench out of habit. He found her sitting upright on the floor, breathing fast, eyes wide with terror. She looked at him, and with a voice full of pain, said, "They cut open my head." Then she covered her mouth with both hands like she wasn't supposed to say it, like she had broken a rule inside herself. Jace dropped the wrench and slowly sat beside her. She was shaking, sweat on her brow, the glowing in her skin flickering like a broken lamp. He didn't ask anything, not yet. He just waited, letting her heartbeat slow, letting her mind return from whatever nightmare had grabbed it. And finally she spoke again. "They locked me in a glass room," she whispered. "I couldn't sleep, couldn't move, only wires." Her voice cracked like dry leaves, but she didn't stop. "They made me listen to machines. Day and night, they told me I was broken." Jace clenched his fists but said nothing. She continued, "I wasn't born. I was made." The silence after those words felt louder than any storm. Jace looked at her closely, her face glowing softly in the dark, her eyes full of sadness and fear. "You're not broken," he said finally. "You're not a thing, Neva." She didn't reply, but her shoulders dropped slightly, and her breathing eased over the next few days. She spoke more, not always clearly, not always calmly, but enough for Jace to understand. She had been created in a secret lab on a moon no longer shown on maps, a mix of organic and synthetic life, born not for family, not for freedom, but for energy. Inside her, a strange core pulsed with raw, endless power. That core, she explained, was meant to power starships, satellites, even weapons. She was not just alive, she was a power source. One day, something went wrong, something exploded, and in the chaos, she escaped. She didn't remember how, only pain and light and falling through space. And then, waking up alone in the junkyard, Jace listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, she looked at him, scared of what he would say. But he only nodded and said, "You're safe here." She looked away quickly, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. It was the first time he'd seen her cry. That evening, while fixing one of the walls, Jace found the tracker chip left by the strangers. His blood went cold. He crushed it under his boot and stared at the sky, knowing it was too late. Someone out there already knew where she was, and they were coming that night. He and Neva sat beside the fire again, but this time he spoke first. "I need to know something," he said. "Can you fight?" She didn't answer at first, just stared into the flames. Then she whispered, "If I fight, I break things." "What kind of things?" he asked. She looked up slowly. "Stars." He didn't sleep that night, not fully. He stayed awake, drawing plans, scanning the junkyard for pieces of tech he had ignored before. If someone was coming for her, they wouldn't take her easily. Not while he had breath in his body. Neva joined him the next morning, without being asked. She helped lift panels, connect wires, and map escape routes. Jace noticed her hands moving faster than his eyes could follow sometimes. She could charge devices just by touching them. She was a living miracle, or maybe a living weapon. But to him, she was more than that. She was the scared girl he found under a broken ship. The one who didn't speak, then whispered truths too big for the world. The one who now stood beside him, helping him prepare for a storm neither could see. The junkyard had always felt like a graveyard, but now it felt like a place of rebirth. Neva was changing, not just learning human words, but human feelings too, and deep inside, Jace felt something rising, something that wasn't just protection. It was loyalty, it was care, it was family. They didn't know when the enemy would arrive, but they both knew something was on the way. And when it came, they would not run. They would face it together and far above the clouds. Hidden behind a dying satellite, a black ship sat in silence, watching, waiting, and tracking every breath she took. Asterisk. The junkyard began to change the moment Neva touched the ground with her bare hands. The metal beneath her pulsed faintly, almost alive. Wires moved slightly, old circuits blinked once and died again. Jace watched from the edge of the hill, unsure if he was dreaming or just losing his mind. But the look in Neva's eyes told him it was real. She was no longer hiding from what she was. They had spent days collecting scrap from the deep corners of the yard. Old cargo panels, fusion shell casings, even forgotten drone wings. Neva walked between the piles like she knew exactly what belonged where, like her mind could read the memory inside each machine. Jace followed, pulling pieces with his tools, welding some, stacking others, but she was the one building at something new, something powerful, at the center of the junkyard. Between two massive ship engines buried in the dirt, they built a wall, not just a wall of defense, but a home. Panels locked together in strange angles, powered by solar glass and leftover plasma cores. The doorway was hidden behind a sheet of broken stealth metal. Inside, the rooms were simple bare floor, warm lights, a small bed, and a table. But it felt more alive than anything Jace had seen in years. Every time Neva touched a surface, it changed, rust disappeared, cracks filled in. Broken screens lit up like stars returning to life. Jace didn't understand how she did it, but he stopped asking questions. He only knew one thing: he had never seen anything more beautiful. Not just the place, but her one night. As he bolted the last shield panel above the door, Neva stood on the roof, staring at the sky. "Why do they want you so badly?" Jace asked from below. She turned, the soft glow of her skin lighting her face. "Because I'm proof they failed," she whispered. He didn't know what she meant, but the way she said it gave him chills. She looked less like a scared girl now and more like something ancient finally waking up. They didn't speak of the black ship, though both knew it was coming. They felt it in their bones, in the air, in the silence between the stars. But instead of fear, they prepared, not with weapons, but with plans, with energy traps made from old engine coils, with decoys built from mannequins and broadcast beacons. Neva showed him how to build a signal jammer using broken AI memory drives. Her fingers moved fast, her eyes glowing brighter with each spark. Jace worked beside her, watching, learning, protecting. Their bond had no words, but it was stronger than any steel beam. One day, she handed him a strange cube, glowing softly. "Place this in the center," she said. "If they come, it will buy us time." He looked at it, unsure whether it was a bomb, a shield, or something else. But he trusted her. He placed it under the floor of the main room, hidden in a circle of old war plating. The fortress was ready. It didn't look like much from the outside, just another pile of junk under the desert sun. But inside, it was a home, a defense, a machine of hope, built by hands that had suffered and hands that had healed. That night, they sat in the main room, silent again. Jace handed her a cup of warm liquid, and for the first time she smiled. Without hiding it, "I never thought I'd want to stay anywhere," she said softly. He looked at her, and for once, he didn't feel like just a scavenger. He felt like someone who had made something that mattered. But peace never lasts long. When someone's hunting you, and as they rested, a ripple passed through the walls. The radio crackled again, not with noise, but a voice. It spoke a code Jace had never heard, cold and sharp like a knife. Neva stood up, her body suddenly still, her eyes losing their glow for a second. "They found me," she said, voice almost calm. "They're already here." Jace grabbed the rod near his bed and checked the outer sensors. A drone was flying low near the western ridge. Scanning with a green beam, he flipped the breaker, activating the traps. Power lines surged, and the metal fortress came alive. Lights hidden under scrap piles blinked red, engines powered by her. Energy started humming deep under the ground. She looked at him and said something that sounded too ancient to be in English. But he understood the meaning in her eyes. She wasn't running anymore. She was going to stand and protect the home they built together. And he would stand with her, even if it meant losing everything. Far away, inside the dark ship orbiting above, a masked figure watched the feed. And when he saw the human standing beside the glowing girl, he whispered. So the pet became the guardian. Asterisk, the warning didn't come with sirens or alarms. It came with silence, a sudden, crushing silence that fell over the entire junkyard like a heavy blanket. No wind, no hum of solar panels, no buzzing insects. Even the birds had vanished from the sky. Jay stepped outside, his hands trembling just a little. The air felt heavier than usual, as if something massive was pressing down from above. Behind him, Neva stood barefoot on the metal floor, her body glowing brighter than ever. Her eyes were focused toward the horizon. "They're close," she whispered, in the distance. Black dots moved between the hills of scrap, not men, not creatures, machines. Four-legged drones with glowing red eyes and long metal claws. They moved with perfect silence, crawling over sharp metal like spiders. Behind them floated a tall figure in dark armor, face covered by a silver mask. Jace didn't recognize the man, but Neva did. Her glow dimmed slightly as she spoke. "That's Handler 9. Jace narrowed his eyes. "He's the one who made you?" "No," she said. "He's the one who broke me." Without another word, they activated the traps. Hidden coils under the dirt snapped to life, sending pulses through the ground. One drone stepped on the wrong panel and exploded into sparks. The others scattered, learning, adapting. Jace cursed under his breath. "They're smarter than before." Neva raised her arms, her fingers trembling as blue light surged from her skin. She wasn't just powering the defenses now, she was part of them. Every wall, every hidden turret, every shield she controlled. It like it was her second skin. Jace stood beside her, guarding the narrow entrance with an old plasma blade. The first wave came fast. Drones launched small spikes into the outer wall, trying to tear it down, but the walls shimmered with her energy. Turning solid and smooth, the spikes bounced off and shattered into dust. Then came the sound, low, metallic, rising like a scream from underground. The floating masked figure stepped forward. Raising one hand, a burst of energy hit the shield, causing the walls to shake. Neva gasped and dropped to one knee. Jace ran to her side, but she shook her head. "I'm fine," she whispered. "They're draining me." He helped her to her feet, heart pounding. The fortress was strong, but not invincible, and they were running out of time. "Fall back to the core room," Jace said, grabbing her arm. She didn't argue. They ran through the narrow tunnels, sparks falling around them like angry fireflies. Behind them, metal exploded, sending shrapnel through the air. Inside the core room, the cube she had given him days ago sat quietly in its place. Now it glowed brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. Jace looked at her. "What does it do?" Neva placed her hand over it, her glow merging with the cube's light. "It gives me back everything they took," she said. Outside, the walls collapsed. The enemy was inside now, walking slowly through the remains. The masked figure stepped through the smoke, scanning the area with calm confidence. He spoke through a voice amplifier, cold and sharp. "You had your freedom, little spark," he said. "Now give it back." Neva stood tall in the center of the room. She looked different now, not just glowing, but shining. Her body pulsed with energy. Her voice echoed without effort. "I'm not yours anymore," she said, "and I'm not alone." Jay stood beside her, blade in hand. The enemy stepped forward, reaching out with a long metal rod. But before he could touch the cube, Neva raised her hands and screamed. The room exploded in light. Walls bent outward as waves of energy pushed through the entire junkyard. The drones shut down mid-step, falling like broken toys. The masked man flew backward and hit a pile of scrap, cracking his armor. When the light faded, only Neva and Jace stood, breathing hard. Her skin no longer flickered, it burned with steady power. Jace turned to her, amazed. She looked down at her hands, shocked by what she had done. "I didn't know I could do that," she said softly. He smiled through the dust and smoke. "Now you do." The masked man tried to stand, but his legs gave out. Neva walked toward him slowly. He reached for a weapon, but it melted in his hand before he could lift it. "You wanted to use me," she said. "But now you'll remember me." She touched his chest, and the lights in his armor went out, one by one. Then she turned and walked away. Jace followed her, the junkyard still glowing with her light. Nothing chased them now, nothing hunted. For the first time since she had fallen from the stars, she was free. And the home they built though damage still stood behind them. A symbol that even the broken could become strong again. Asterisk. Asterisk. The junkyard was quiet again, but it was no longer silent out of fear. It was the quiet that came after a storm, when everything broken had already fallen, metal still smoked in places, and the ground was covered in ash and pieces of machines. But through the wreckage, something beautiful remained standing. Jace walked slowly past the shattered wall, his legs aching from bruises. His hands were scraped and his coat was torn. But he smiled because he was still breathing. And more importantly, so was she. Neva stood on the rooftop of what was left of their fortress, her hair lifting slightly in the soft breeze. The glow that once flickered in her skin was now calm and steady. She didn't shake when she walked anymore. She didn't hide behind silence. She stood like someone who had found her place. Jace climbed up beside her, his boots crunching on the loose bolts and wires. She turned to him with a look he hadn't seen before. Peace. They didn't speak for a long time, just watched the sky. The stars above were clear again. No more enemy ships, no more red lights scanning the world. I don't want to run anymore, she said softly. You don't have to, he replied. I thought I was made to be a tool, she added. But you made me feel like something more. Jace didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge, something small and dusty. It had belonged to a scout captain long ago, someone who once built homes on broken planets. He handed it to her without saying a word. She took it carefully, as if it weighed more than it looked. Then she smiled, and that smile lit up the roof brighter than the stars. Over the next few days, they rebuilt what they could. The outer walls were patched with new metal, power systems were rerouted, and from the debris, Neva built new machines, small helper bots, light bridges, even a wind tower. The junkyard didn't look like a graveyard anymore. It looked like a home, a real home. Visitors came. Slowly, carefully, drifters, runaways, abandoned machines with working minds. Each one heard whispers of the glowing girl and the human who stood beside her. Some came in fear, some in hope. All left changed. Jace built a bench under the solar tower, where he liked to sit in the evenings. One night, Neva joined him and handed him a folded piece of metal, shaped like a frame. Inside it was a photo, an image captured by one of the bots without them knowing. It showed the two of them standing together in front of the fortress, dirty, tired, but smiling. He held the frame gently, unsure what to say. You gave me something I never had, she said. What's that? He asked. A place to belong. Her voice didn't tremble anymore. She didn't speak like she was afraid someone might stop her. She spoke like someone who knew her words mattered, and to Jace, they did more than anything. Later that week, she attached a signal tower to the far hill, not to call for help, not to hide from enemies, but to send a message to the stars. A single sentence repeating through the empty sky. This is a safe place. Jace didn't ask who she hoped would hear it. Maybe someone like her, lost and running. Maybe someone like him, searching for purpose in a pile of trash. Whatever the reason, the message was real. Just like everything they had built. One morning, Neva looked up from her work and said, You never asked me what I really am. Jace shrugged. Didn't need to. Why not? She asked. Because no matter what you're made of, you're still the best part of this world. She looked away quickly, smiling to herself, pretending she didn't blush, but the way her light pulsed gently across her skin gave her away. That evening, as the twin moons rose and the wind turned cool, they stood together once more, not as a broken machine and a lonely man, but as two people who had saved each other. She reached out and held his hand. Her voice was steady when she said, You built me a home. He squeezed her hand softly and said, And you made it worth living in. Above them, the stars twinkled without threat. No enemies, no shadows, no masks, only peace. And far across the galaxy, the message continued to echo. This is a safe place. This is a home.